Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Oh my God, what an awesome Saturday night.
Oh, congratulations on the new EP.
Yes, Wendy, good job playing. We had a lot of fun at the Frequency in Madison, and everybody that showed up, you are the greatest people in the universe, and thank you for being the greatest people in the universe.
It was a party, all right.
Yes, it's a new EP that we released, and it's called The Wilderness of Almost Was and Never Were, and you guys can check that out as part of the mailing list. And you can find that at othersidepodcast.com or sunspotuniverse.com is how that you guys can get involved and be part of that.
That's right. And we have the cover of it is a special coloring book page that we're kind of having a little coloring contest. So you can download that and send us your submission if you are interested.
Oh, yeah, please do that. So check that out. And you guys can get on the mailing list. A lot of you are already on the mailing list, so you already know about it. But just letting you know. So please do check that out. These are all songs that we wrote for the podcast. And then we take our favorite demos and tracks that we write for the podcast, and then we put them into a studio, and we give them the full Hollywood glamour rock and roll treatment in the recording studio.
Uh-huh.
So that was fun. And there's another place that people can find more music and things like that. And that place is a little store known as iTunes. Isn't that right?
Oh,
Wayne?
yeah. That's right. And guess what else is in iTunes?
What?
There's reviews of our podcast, and we have a new one this week.
Holy crap. What is it?
I know. It's amazing. Okay. You ready for this? And it's 5 stars.
So obviously the person has excellent taste.
Funny and informative, great dialogue, and awesome stories by Comical Podcasts. This podcast is outstanding. Mike and Wendy are fantastic together.
We are.
Very funny people with an awesome take on the paranormal. Love Herm of the Herm's House Radio Podcast. And funny enough, we were on the Herm's House Radio Podcast last week.
Oh, that's right. We were.
Yeah. Yes. So he contacted us to see if we'd join his show, and we had a really fun time talking with him.
That's true.
And you can hear that episode if you look up the Herm's House Radio Podcast. And that's Herm, Hurrrm. 3 R's.
There's 3 R's,
yes.
like how you'd think you'd spell Herm.
Triple R.
R.
It's like a pirate station. But anyway, we are on the January 8th episode of that. So if you want to hear Mike and I talking to a comedian on a night that we're not recording our own podcast, check that out, the January 8th episode. And thank you, Herm, for your 5-star review. We really appreciate that. Well, today we have a special treat here with us.
A special treat? Is it like Rice Krispie treats?
Ooh, even better.
Okay, even better. Even better. It's my sister. It's our favorite weirdo.
That's right. She brings treats in the form of knowledge about things like ghosts and hauntings and exorcisms. Yep. Allison Jornlin of Milwaukee Ghosts.
That's me.
Welcome.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Allison, you actually inspired this week's topic.
Yeah, well, we were at the Haunted America conference and, coming back from it and talking shop, and I was like, we have got to get Robert Damon Schneck on the podcast because he's a Fortean after my own heart. He is somebody who likes to do what I do, which is sit around and read old newspapers and find the weirdest, sickest stories you can, and then blog about them and tell other people about them. He does that as well. So I'm sorry I couldn't be actually on the interview this time, but hopefully we'll get him back in the future because I'm like his biggest fan.
Yeah, and thanks for inspiring that.
Yes, that really was a great idea because I was all excited to do it because, number one, the story that Robert Damon Schneck tells in this particular podcast and that inspired the film, The Bye-Bye Man, that came out this weekend on Friday the 13th. The story that inspired it took place right in Madison, Wisconsin. And he's like, well, actually, Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Sun Prairie's close enough. It's like saying Verona, Wisconsin, anything like that.
Right.
It's like, might as well be in Madison. Like, everybody works in Madison who lives in Sun Prairie anyway. But that's so great from this area. And also I hear that in the movie, they say it takes place in Sun Prairie and Madison too.
Oh,
so they
cool.
don't change the location
connections.
for the movie.
Wow.
Right. Even though they filmed it in Cleveland. And I tried to make the connection, and we talk about it in the interview a little bit. But just the fact that all this kind of strangeness happened in the early 90s with a Ouija board in Wisconsin. I just love that Wisconsin is the home of strange things in the United States.
You better believe it.
You don't really get stranger. And speaking of strange, Robert Damon Schneck is the historian of the strange. And let's go to him. All right, we are here with Robert Damon Schneck, the historian of the strange and author, and the guy that originally wrote the story that inspired the movie that just came out, The Bye-Bye Man. All right, how you doing today, Robert?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Well, it's a little warmer here in Wisconsin. So over the weekend it was -10. Today it's about 22 degrees. So it's great.
It's tropical.
Right. I was gonna say I'm not even wearing full pants today. Well, anyway. So Robert, just wanted to talk a little bit about your books and what got you into this. And I find that when people are into paranormal stuff or even into just weird history and things like that, it's a certain kind of commitment that doesn't come with other type of topics and stuff like, because, you can write great literature or you can write about sports or something, but when you write about the paranormal and weird stories and history and things, you have to have a certain commitment. When did you know that was going to be the type of thing that you were going to write about?
Well, I actually did not start out as a writer. I started out as an illustrator, but this was always my fascination. Ever since I started losing interest in dinosaurs, I switched over to Bigfoot. That's what really got me started. Two books in particular, On the Track of Unknown Animals by Bernard Heuvelman, and the big Ivan Sanderson book about Bigfoot and Yeti, Abominable Snowman Legend Come to Life. My library had both of them, and I read them and reread them and reread them, and that more or less determined where I was going to go. Although my very first exposure to it, now that I think on it, was the book Stranger Than Science by Frank Edwards.
Okay.
My mother left a dog-eared copy of it on her night table when I was very young, and I somehow got a hold of it, and I devoured that book. And that actually comes closer to what I've ended up doing, because it's really a collection of kind of open-ended weirdness. It's not as defined as something like cryptozoology or parapsychology. It's that's why I really call what I do writing about the strange but true. That way I can write about any odd thing that really interests me.
Sure. So you're more of you're that Charles Fort brand of writer.
I suppose, although Charles Fort was really into big theories, though, even though I don't think he took them all that seriously.
Right.
But he loved big theories, even if he concocted them just to annoy people. I seldom have big theories. Probably the most elevated thing I do with my writing is I use it to try to find things about America's past and American culture that have either been forgotten or really were not appreciated. I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. In my second book, Mrs. Wakeman versus the Antichrist, I have a chapter on a cult of blood drinkers that supposedly existed in Kansas City. Now, there were a couple of newspaper articles about it, and I was never able to. It was supposedly led by a man named Silas Wilcox, and members would drink each other's blood to improve each other's health. Now, I thought that was interesting, so I began looking into it. I was never able to determine whether or not the group ever existed. I was never able to document anything. But what I did learn was that for a good part of the 19th century, a lot of Americans and a lot of people around the world would, when they got sick or suffered from certain illnesses, go to the local slaughterhouse and drink the blood of freshly slaughtered animals.
Oh my God, I've never heard that before. So so you're sick, and that's not even in a vampiric kind of way. That's just like a regular kind of person. Is like, you know what?
Yes.
I came down with a cold. I really could use some hog's blood today.
Well, what it was, this really surprised me because, it's funny. I mentioned to somebody that you could be an expert on the Civil War, you can be an expert on on anything, but you still might not know that Americans during that period were drinking cow blood at the slaughterhouse. It was the idea was that, and it's a very primitive idea, that blood is actually liquid life. It is the essence of life, and when a healthy, big, strong animal is slaughtered, its blood escapes. The strength and the power of the animal is escaping into the blood, and it's transferable to people who drink it. That was the idea. It's a primitive idea. The ancient Romans did it. People that suffered from epilepsy people who suffered from epilepsy would run down into the arena where gladiators were wounded and dying, and they would apply their mouths to the gladiators' wounds and drink the blood as the gladiator died as a cure for epilepsy. And that was still being done. Well, not without the gladiators, of course, but human blood was still being given as a cure for epilepsy in the 19th century. When Hans Christian Andersen was a boy, he witnessed an execution. I think he was in Denmark when he was a boy, where the man's head was lopped off, and a glass of blood was collected, and it was given to a child with epilepsy to drink as a cure.
Oh, now, of course, now where do you find a story like that? Is that like in Hans Christian Andersen's biography or something? Or
no. It was a strange. There are. Every couple of years, somebody will come out and say, "Oh, there are medicinal properties to blood." It happens every few years. Someone will say that if you give transfusions of young mice, the blood of young mice to old mice, it rejuvenates them. This always happens. So, but when I began looking into this story about the slaughterhouse, the people drinking blood in the slaughterhouse, first of all, I was shocked.
Right.
I didn't even know. I didn't know that a person could drink blood and keep it down. I had always heard that if you drink blood, you'll throw it back up because it's high in iron and things like that. Mm-hmm. But it turns out you can actually drink quite a bit of fresh blood. In fact,
now you didn't try any of this when you were doing your research. You're not you didn't stop by the slaughterhouse and you're like, load me up.
No. They won't let me in the slaughterhouse anymore. Anyway, in one case, a reporter was doing a story on the Slaughterhouse Vampires. So he went down to the slaughterhouse, and there were the people taking their glasses of blood. And he decided, well, they can do it. I have to try it. And he said that, first of all, it was surprisingly good. And he said it tasted like hot milk right out of the cow. So one person claimed that he found it not bad. So I guess these other people were able to do it too. But this really was, I won't say a lot of people did it, but it was widespread there. In fact, one of the things that got me started on it was I found a painting by a 19th century French artist that shows a bull, a young bull, on the floor of a slaughterhouse, and a bunch of nice middle-class people standing around being handed glasses of warm blood to drink. And that was one of the things that got me started on it, because I said this was common enough to be a painting. And that's when I found out, well, again, not common, but widespread. And one of the things that came of this that really surprised me was 2 years ago, I was on a book panel, and I told the story about this this habit that was done in the 19th century.
Americans' blood drinking habit.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just America. It was done especially in Europe. But a lady on the panel told me after we sat down, she said that Her father had worked in a slaughterhouse in the 60s and 70s, and he said that people used to come in as late as then to drink fresh blood. So the habit has not disappeared, at least as late as the 60s or 70s when he was working in a slaughterhouse, which shocked me. I couldn't believe that.
Well, they still make it in Milwaukee sometimes. The Polish delicacy of chanina.
Oh yeah, well, the German cooking, Eastern European cooking has a lot of blood, but that's at least cooked.
Right, that's not right from the source.
That's not straight from the cow's jugular. But again, like I said, that really surprised me when the lady told me this. When we were talking about launching the book, there's a woman in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, who is a living vampire. She makes no bones about being a vampire, and she has several friends who are donors for her vampirism. And she says more or less what these people said. She says that when she's drinking blood, she feels prettier, she feels more excited, she feels more lively.
She's got the Elizabeth Bathory thing going on.
Apparently, but she drinks, she doesn't bathe. And I was there was a talk of a book launch, so I was wondering if we could bring her in and she could do a demonstration. But apparently, the Board of Health won't let you do that in New York, and the whole thing fell through. But it would have made for quite a book launch.
I would say. No. Where did you grow up, Robert? Like, where did you when you were first reading these books?
In Paramus, New Jersey.
Okay,
it's a suburb of New York City. Mainly, we're 4 or 5 big shopping malls with little developments between them.
Sure. No, I understand that.
Yeah, I grew up between 2 gigantic malls.
Well, that's the burbs.
Yeah, it is.
So you find out these interesting things, and you started to get involved. I mean, were you originally thinking about journalism, or how did you get into just like writing articles? Like, how do you get to be the historian of the strange? How does that career develop?
Well, I was always reading books about it, and it's wonderful. One of the great things about writing about the strange but true is, as I got old, as I began doing it more seriously, I realized I was becoming friends with all the writers I used to read, which was that was so exciting.
Mm-hmm.
People like getting emails from Lauren Coleman and Joe Citro and all these people who I've read for years, and suddenly they're my friends, which was terrific. But for me, it actually began when I was reading a book it was a book called, I think, Letters from Serial Killers. I think that's what it was, or written by serial killers. I don't remember. I just remember it was by the Bloat Press. You don't forget the Bloat Press. and what this book contained was, among other things, it contained the notebooks that Charles Starkweather kept when he was in prison before his execution. Now, one of the things he wrote about was, he said that when he was a young man, a giant figure of death used to appear outside of his window growing up in Lincoln, Nebraska. And the description sounded like a Bigfoot. It sounded so much like a Bigfoot that I couldn't believe it wasn't a Bigfoot. He even included a vague drawing of just this great big kind of pointy-headed figure.
If you guys out there don't know who Charles Starkweather is, now he was in the 50s, and he took a girl with him, and they did a joyride through the Midwest, right? And ended up killing.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah, it was his girlfriend. She was, I think, 14. He was just barely 18. They were kids, really.
Martin Sheen plays him in the movie Badlands. So
that's right.
If that intrigues you, check out the movie from 1973.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. Charlie Starkweather was a garbage man, and he thought he was short. He had bow legs. He was redheaded, and he said people used to make fun of him for that. He thought the whole world was against him, and he decided to take revenge. And what he did was he drove around with his girlfriend and just shot people dead. It was a pretty awful. It was,
yeah.
And it was also one of those things. It was the classic 1950s JD. He modeled himself on James Dean, and he was a classic juvenile delinquent. But to return to this notebook he kept, so I never forgot reading that story, and I began writing when I was talking to a friend of mine who was an editor of a magazine, and I just happened to mention to him that I just finished reading a really interesting book on something else. And he said, "Well, why don't you write a review for it? I'll print it. I'll give you some money." I said, "Well, I like the sound of that."
Right, that
And
sounds
that
great.
was, yeah, and that was the first thing I ever got paid for. And then I decided, well, I've had this story about this sort of Bigfoot sighting that Charles Starkweather reported. I'm going to write to, I'm going to see maybe if Fate will print it.
And that's Fate magazine.
Fate magazine, right. And I was very cautious. I had no idea what I was doing. So I wrote it up. They printed it. It was, first time out of the box. I submitted something. It was printed, which is very rare. But Fate led to the Fortean Times. I was also working for other magazines at the time, including some adult magazines,
Sure.
and at Boys Life and a few other places.
I remember getting a subscription to Boys Life when I was a Cub Scout in the 80s. And it makes me laugh to think about it. It's like the same person who was writing that particular article about camping or something like that also has to then go write, something for Playboy or Penthouse in the next, but that's a writer's life.
I wish it was Playboy or Penthouse.
Sure.
It was less glamorous magazines, but they paid the bills.
Hey.
And actually, you're young enough. You might even have seen the story I wrote. It was called "The Hermit of Wolf Rocks." It was about a hermit in Pennsylvania who he had an unhappy love affair, so he left his home and he went to go live on this mountain under this pile of rocks. And he spent several years under there. There were local legends about a wild man in the woods, and it was him.
Right.
And he eventually was found because somebody was passing by these rocks and they noticed smoke coming out of the ground. That was his cook stove. And that's when he was flushed out. And for a while there, he seemed to really enjoy the company. He got a lot of people came to visit him, and he became a little bit of a celebrity. And he got tired of the attention, and he disappeared again, and was never seen. But that was I think the only thing that I wrote for Boys Life that they printed. I wrote a few other things. Yeah, I wrote a few other things that I don't know if they printed them or not. And that was when I really had just started. So. And the idea of being in Boys Life was very exciting for me because it was mainstream. It meant I could do mainstream work if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But I am not a mainstream sort of person. Writing about a crazy hermit was as close to mainstream as I could get. I mean, then I wrote for New York Magazine a little bit.
Okay.
New York Mag, and but the only thing I was able to write for them was about something called the Thanatology Foundation in Brooklyn. And the Thanatology Foundation is a foundation dedicated to the study of death.
Oh, right. Thanatos, right? The god of death.
Right, Thanatos. I spent a fascinating afternoon with the woman who ran the place. Lovely woman. And she was an expert in thanatology. She had every book on the subject you could imagine. She had several coffins that had been made into bookcases, which was neat.
Of course.
There were headstone rubbings all over the place. Beautiful headstone rubbings. She had Edgar Allan Poe's headstone. She had a bunch of them. But it was just a terrific place. But like I said, that was about as mainstream as I could ever get for those magazines. And the fact of the matter is, magazines were already starting to dry up.
Sure.
And so finally, for me, the big breakthrough was getting into the Fortean Times, which was my favorite magazine in the world. I never thought I would get in there. For me, that was the equivalent of getting into Time, Smithsonian, American history. I mean, you name it, that was my goal.
For a weird writer, the Fortean Times really is the gold standard.
Yeah. There are two things. Appearing in the Fortean Times and being a guest on Coast to Coast.
Right.
If you can do those two things, you've made to a certain extent. So anyway, I began to get things. I began to sell things to the Fortean Times, and I knew I wanted to write a book. And I decided that I haven't made many successful plans in my life. This was one of the few. And I said to myself, well, there are two things that I'm really interested in: the bizarre and history. Now, I could do history around the world, but writing history around the world is very difficult because I want to do good research.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to write junk. I want this work to be as seriously researched as anything that appears in any scientific journal. I want a footnote for every assertion. I want this to be properly written. So, and the only way to really do that kind of thorough research is in your own country. Otherwise, you're constantly, you've got to deal with.
Well, and you got to deal with translations and things like that, and you're always getting secondhand from somebody who's kind of.
Yeah, it's just a real problem. A lot of it has to do with just the amount of declare. I wrote a story about Canada, and even that was difficult because you had to fill in your envelope and explain everything that was in it for the customs officials and all that. It was a pain. So
Right.
I decided I'm going to concentrate on the United States, and I'm going to concentrate on anything bizarre that I find interesting that I think the Fortean Times will print. And when I get enough of these, I'm going to write a book. I'll put them together and I'll make it a book. So that was what I started out doing. And I wrote to, I used to go to a place called the Parapsychology Foundation in New York City.
Oh,
and
sure.
I got to meet people like Hans Holzer and other Martin Ebon. These were people that were really big in the ghosts and
Right.
parapsychology.
I mean, everybody. Hans Holder. I think his daughter still does it. Like it's their family
she
business
still
now.
does. Yeah, family business. I used to sit next to Hans Holzer, and I was in awe of the man's nose. It was gigantic.
Big schnoz.
Oh my gosh. And it had all of these little nooks and crannies in it. It was just astonishing. He was a character. He was a lot of fun, but he was a character.
Well,
No
we're talking real quick. I mean, interrupt you here, Robert, but we have to get to the story of the hour here. And I could listen to you tell stories about Hans Holzer all day, or just, to me, going to the Parapsychology Foundation is a dream.
Oh, yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was.
How did you get the story of the Bye-Bye Man? How did it show up, and how did you get it? And
all right. So I became friends with a guy named Eli at the Parapsychology Foundation.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
I was there at the time. I was looking for stories about 20th century werewolf reports. So I was there. The lady who was the librarian introduced us. She thought we would make friends. We did. And he invited me to one of his Halloween parties. No, I take that back. Not a Halloween party, a Devil's Night party.
Okay, so October 30th, the day before. We've done a special on that. We had somebody who used to work in the Detroit paramedics and stuff like that go over the Devil's Night stuff with us.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, one of the highlights of Eli's Devil's Night party was that there was a drawing for whoever guessed the right number of fires in Detroit that night would win a prize.
I want to go to that party. That sounds like a great party.
Excuse me. So anyway, I attended the party, and as it turned out, Eli always ends these parties the same way. He invites guests to tell any real ghost stories, any real scary stories they've had with monsters, demons, ghosts, anything like that. So a couple of people always do. And then Eli tells the story that happened to him, which was the story of the Bye-Bye Man. Now, it used to be that I wouldn't reveal the name of the Bye-Bye Man unless somebody specifically asked for it.
Sure.
So now that you can't turn on the television without seeing it, I guess there's no point in doing that anymore.
Right. I mean, and that's part of the story too. Like the name itself is part of the story. So I'll let you keep going. Sorry.
Okay, so Eli would tell the story of the Bye-Bye Man, and very simply, the story went like this. When he was working in Sun Prairie, he was working in a home it was a group home for people suffering from something called Prader-Willi syndrome, which is a very odd genetic disorder, which we will skip over.
Sure, but to let everybody know, Sun Prairie is a suburb of Madison, so it's just about 10 miles away from where I'm sitting right now. So it's on the eastern side of Madison, Wisconsin. just
Right.
for everybody listening.
And he was actually living there, and his girlfriend was there a lot, and a mutual friend of theirs named John was there a lot. Well, somebody gave them an old Ouija board, and they came up with some story about how the Ouija board is cursed or something. No one paid much attention to that. But so it's winter in Sun Prairie. I'd imagine there's not a lot to do. And Eli loves psychical research. So he said, let's fool around with the Ouija board. Let's do some experiments with it. Well, Eli couldn't get the board to move. I should mention that Eli is an absolute buzzkill when it comes to the paranormal. Nothing paranormal ever happens around him. He has been trying he has gone legend tripping. He has been involved in psychical research. He has gone on ghost hunts. Nothing happens when he's around. No one knows why.
Just, right. He's like instead of the ghost whisperer or whatever, he's the ghost like anti-magnet or.
Yeah, he is. He repels it. So anyway, he couldn't get the board to do anything. He and his friend John couldn't get the board to do anything. Anyway, he and his friend his girlfriend Catherine and John, they were able to get the board to move. So finally, they were able to get the board to move, and Eli wanted to do some experiments. So when they began to get the board to move, and Eli wanted to see if, for example, they could get the board to spell out messages. Oh, and I should mention also, they were getting the board to spell out messages. And the messages were kind of new agey, light, crystals, granola, all that stuff. Nice stuff. All from spirits that had never been human. They were all kind of just nice spiritual beings, coming to the light sort of thing. So
they weren't like ghosts or anything like that. So
no,
the people that Eli and his friends were originally talking to were just entities that always existed in the spiritual plane.
Exactly. That's what they claimed. So there was nothing scary about it. Anyway, they did some experiments. Eli wanted to see if they could get messages with John and Catherine blindfolded. They got some messages that way. As they were blindfolded, he would move the board around. They still got messages. So they were doing some interesting things. Eventually, they tried something where Eli would concentrate on. He'd write he was keeping notebooks of all the stuff that came through. And
sure.
If you know Eli, you'd know he was starting to become impatient with this, because Eli loves scary things. And these nice, disembodied beings were not really his cup of tea. He was getting bored. And he also wanted to do a more interesting experiment. So what he did was he said, they tried a few other experiments with the Ouija board, but then he said, okay, can any of these spirits put us in touch with somebody who was alive and died? And can this person, this spirit, give us some information that we couldn't possibly know but can verify? The idea was, let's see if we can get what parapsychologists call veridical information, something that can be proven.
Sure.
To say, something paranormal has happened.
Like if you can get like the date of a death or something like that, and then go and then find the gravestone, or so like to get some knowledge that there was no way you could learn except through the book.
Right. Now, of course, though, even if they did, some skeptics would say, "Oh, they found it some way." But that's not the point. For Eli's own satisfaction, he knew what he wanted, and that's what they set out to do. Well, it turned out that they weren't having much luck getting in touch with the spirit of the dead. And I should mention one other thing. I'm sorry I skipped this. One of the oddities about using the board with Catherine and John was that they did not speak directly to the spirits. This is kind of interesting. They had to go through a spirit or a being that called itself the spirit of the board. So think of it a little bit like a medium who uses her spirit guide to reach other spirits.
Sure.
It's like she might go into a trance. She contacts her spirit guide. The spirit guide leads her to the spirit of your Aunt Fanny, and that's how you communicate with the spirit of your Aunt Fanny.
Right, but it's like the medium's on the other side.
Right. So the way this was working was that they had to contact the spirit of the board in order to contact these other spirits. Now, as Eli became he really was becoming impatient with it. He wanted to talk to someone who was dead, and the spirits told him that they weren't in contact with anyone who was dead. They were in contact with someone who was alive and who wanted to contact them, but was very evil, and they didn't want to have anything to do with that. Well, that you might as well have just waved a red flag at Eli, because evil, that's got to be cool.
Right, of course.
So, yeah, Catherine was not happy about the idea of trying to track down something evil, but Eli really wanted them to keep going for it. So they kept at it, and they kept at it, and they started harassing the spirits to, like, come on, put us in contact with this one. Let us know. Well, the other spirits began to disappear, and finally the spirit of the board said, no, I won't do it. And Eli had them go on strike. He knew that the spirit of the board loved to communicate. So he said, we're not going to communicate with you anymore until you put us in contact with this being. That actually worked. But he wouldn't put them in contact with the being itself. He would only transmit the information because the being was too evil.
Okay.
So over a period of time, they were able to piece together the story of this being that called himself the Bye-Bye Man. And the story goes like this. Sometime in the 1920s, a boy was born down in Louisiana. He was an albino, and he had very bad eyesight, and his parents were poor and unable to take care of him. So they put him in an orphanage in a place called Algiers. Now, keep in mind, again, this is all coming through the Ouija board in bits and pieces. Eli is writing it all down, trying to put it together. So it did not come out in order. But anyway, so this little boy in the orphanage, his eyesight is getting worse, and his behavior is wild. He's uncontrollable. He's a bad kid. And as he gets older, his sight goes completely. The other children torment him because he's an albino, he's strange, and he starts running away. But first of all, he's an albino, and second of all, he's blind. He doesn't get far.
Right.
So they keep bringing him back. And by the time that he's an adolescent, he attacks a nurse with a pair of scissors and cripples her for life.
Oh, God.
And then he escapes from the orphanage and makes it to a rail yard and starts riding the rails. Now, at some point, we don't know when, he changes into something else. He's no longer a normal blind albino boy, like most normal blind albino boys.
Right. I see them all the time. They're all over Madison.
Yeah, he's changed into something that, for some reason, gets the name the Bye-Bye Man. Maybe he became involved in black magic. We don't know.
Well, what makes me think about this, to unpack the name real quick of the Bye-Bye Man, what makes me think about this is that I feel like the spirit of the board is playing with them there, because Ouija, or the Ouija board or whatever, is, that's like the yes, yes board. The we and the ya, the French yes and the German yes.
I'll be honest with you, Mike. I never believed that. According to the man who actually invented the board, he said the name came from the board itself. I have a theory about that. Personally, I think that it might be based on the Egyptian word ujat or wedjat. Wedjat is one of the words, which is an Egyptian word for good luck. In the very early versions of the Ouija board, it's called the Egyptian good luck board.
Oh.
Now, I can't prove this, of course. It's just a theory I have that, and I think it makes more sense than yes, yes. I mean, what does that mean?
Nothing.
Doesn't mean anything. I think that was one of the. I think that was just an explanation that. The guy who bought the board, the Fold. I think that was just something Fold came up with to enhance the board's reputation.
Sure.
Again, I my own theory is wedge at. I can't prove it, but it's something I think. So anyway, back to the story that's coming out of the Yes Yes board. So again, he's changed into something else, and mutilated bodies start turning up by railroad tracks.
No, we think of this when we think of Louisiana. The whole time I think of him changing into something. All I can think of is got to be some kind of voodoo. Obviously, that's the cliche. It's got to be some kind of voodoo magic in Louisiana.
It's possible. I mean, it does make sense because, as it turns out later, I did some research. Algiers is notorious for voodoo.
Okay.
So at some point, the spirit tells them that he's, like I said, he's turned into this thing. He's turned into the Bye-Bye Man. And he wears a broad-brimmed hat. He wears dark glasses with the lenses painted black. He has long white hair. He wears a kind of sailor's peacoat. He carries a kind of a sailor's sack that he calls the sack of gore. And it's got bloodstains on it. And he is accompanied by a monster, a thing that he makes, that he apparently made from, I'm just assuming this, it's made from tongues and eyes. And presumably they're the tongues and eyes of his victims, because all of the victims have been mutilated. So, and he's stitched them together and infused this creature with some kind of a life. And the creature's name is Gloomsinger. Now,
Gloomsinger. Oh, I love that. Now, there's an idea for your song right there.
Anyway, the Bye-Bye Man and the Gloomsinger ride the rails just like a hobo. And they travel around the country. But what they do is this. When a person hears the name the Bye-Bye Man or Gloomsinger, it makes them vulnerable. When they keep thinking, it makes them vulnerable to the Bye-Bye Man, because as long as you think the name the Bye-Bye Man, it turns your mind into a kind of psychic beacon. And as long as you think Bye-Bye Man, it's like sending out a signal, and he starts to head in your direction. And he starts to hunt you down. So he begins to ride the rails in your direction. Now, when the Bye-Bye Man gets close, bear in mind, he's blind, he can't see. That's where Gloomsinger comes in, because Gloomsinger is all eyes and tongues. So this bizarre little creature starts rolling along, and when it sights the victim, the one who keeps thinking the name, it lets out this whistle. And then the Bye-Bye Man comes in for the kill.
Okay, so Gloomsinger, all tongues and eyes. So you think of the sensory things, the tongue, the taste, the maybe speech,
exactly.
Eyes. You have the sight. So he can't see, but he's got the little creature. The little creature finds you, and then lets him know you're there. Oh, that's okay. That's even grosser.
It's pretty weird.
I love it.
So then, the spirit of the board announces that, on top of everything else, the Bye-Bye Man is aware of them, and he's heading in their direction.
And their direction is Madison, Wisconsin in like 1990, right?
No, Sun Prairie.
Okay, Sun Prairie, Wisconsin.
Yeah. And, that did it for Catherine. She was absolutely finished. No more seances, no more sittings. She was done. She has a history of kind of bizarre experiences, and she did not enjoy them. And that was it. I'll tell you something else about that later, but she refused to have anything to do with it. Well, naturally, Eli and John, they were curious. They wanted to keep the seances going with the board, but they couldn't get the board to move. It was over.
So for some reason, the spirit of the board wanted to talk to Catherine.
She was really the medium.
And now we kind of know why you don't want to reveal the name until the end of the story.
That was always the way I did it. Yeah. In fact, what I did was I would say ahead of time that I'll tell the story first, but I won't reveal the name without mentioning first that if you don't want to, if you have problems with intrusive thoughts, you might want to skip the name. Because you won't be able to stop thinking about it. It was about as much showmanship as I've ever managed to squeeze into a presentation. Anyway, that was more or less the end of their business with the Ouija board and getting the story of the Bye-Bye Men. There are more details, but they're in the book. Anyway.
Right. You pick up the book to hear the rest.
I'm sorry?
I said people can pick up the book if they want to get the full experience.
Oh, yeah. You want to read the whole thing. It's all, the more details are in the book. So anyway, after this is all over, Catherine and Eli are living together, and Catherine she cannot sleep. She's having terrible nightmares. She's waking up at night. She's having panic attacks. It's really unpleasant. Eli is sleeping like a rock, as always. Right. Nothing affects him.
Hey, he's not the guy with the paranormal experiences. He's the guy he's the dampener.
Right, exactly. I like I said, I feel bad for him sometimes. But anyway, they decided she was, again, kind of a nervous wreck, and spring was coming, and Eli decided he wanted to go see a concert in Wausau, which is his hometown.
Wausau is a town about 50 or 60,000 people, just about 2.5 hours north of Madison and Sun Prairie. Wausau is like it's really a rural area, and we kind of consider Wausau like one of the first towns of the quote unquote up north, the wilderness area of Wisconsin. So when you're kind of going up there, we call it going up north.
Yeah, it's a nice little town. Mm-hmm. So they traveled up there. There was a concert going on, and Eli and Catherine traveled up to Wausau. And just the concert was in the evening, so they had the afternoon free. So Eli was showing her all the glamour spots of Wausau, which doesn't take too long.
Right, he's done in 10 minutes.
No, it's not a big operation. But one of the nice things they have there is a place called Barker Stewart Island, and Barker Stewart Island is a nature preserve with a railroad track running across it. It's in the Wisconsin River. Apparently, the nickname of Barker Stewart Island is Body Island because the bodies of lumberjacks who died upstream in Big Bull Falls would sometimes wash up on Barker Stewart Island. Also, there were a couple of odd things that happened over time. This woman who worked at a Prangieway store who used to cross the railroad bridge to get home was found murdered on the island. Her intestines were hanging out.
God.
She was buried, and her sister was later murdered at the site of her grave. So there was a whole background to strange things attached to Barker Stewart Island.
Oh, now I can't wait to go there.
Yeah, it's very pretty. In fact, it's got a species of prairie grass growing there that grows nowhere else on the planet Earth. Oh. It's just one of those odd things, and it's right. It's not like it's very far into the river. It's just a railroad bridge across. Anyway, they're walking across the railroad bridge, and Eli said he saw a turtle or something down in the Wisconsin River, so he had to go see it. So he goes down there, and Catherine is on the bridge by herself, and she starts to hear a whistle. Now, a whistle on a railroad bridge is not that strange, but it wasn't a rail whistle. It was kind of like a shrill sort of human whistle. And it was getting louder and louder and louder. And she remembered Gloomsinger. And
the whistle of 1,000 tongues.
The bastard son of 1,000 maniacs. So she panicked. She took off running from the bridge. Eli had no idea what was going on. He, of course, heard nothing. He took off after her because he didn't know what was happening, and she was utterly terrified. She spent the rest of the day having panic attacks. It was a mess. They broke up soon after that. Anyway, Eli spoke to John, who was living in a boarding house in Madison.
Okay.
It's a boarding house on Lake Mendota. I don't remember the address. In fact, there's a photograph of it in the book. Okay. So while I don't have the address, but if you're curious, you can try to find it. I know it's near the end of a street. That's about all I can tell you.
Sure.
Because I deliberately didn't put the address because I thought the people who lived there wouldn't appreciate it.
Well, it's probably on campus. So to tell you the truth, it's probably new people in there every year. So I'm sure they'd love to know.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure someone will come out with it. Someone will figure it out because, like I said, I don't remember. But anyway, John was staying in an attic room in a boarding house, big boarding house in Madison, and Eli came to visit him in Madison. And John was kind of a wreck. He was exhausted looking, and he told Eli a very strange story. One night, he had been having the same problems that Catherine was having.
Mm-hmm.
He was having nightmares. He was waking up at night. He was not getting any rest. And he was lying in bed one night, and he couldn't sleep. So he took out some paper and pencil, and he started to draw or something just to pass the time. And while he was lying there, he heard a knock on the door of his room. There was a hallway down the center of the different rooms that were available for boarders, and there was a light out in the hallway. And so he heard this door knock, and he heard Catherine saying, "Hey, John, come on, let's go for breakfast. It's morning." Well, he gets up, and he's sort of not really paying attention, and he notices that no, it's not morning. It's pitch black outside, and it's around 3 a.m. or so. And the knocking at the door persists. "Come on, John, let's go get breakfast." The knocking persists, and John just collapses. He is utterly terrified.
No
He's
doubt.
lying there on the floor of his bedroom, and he can see the shadows of 2 feet under the door out in the hallway. The knocking continues, and eventually he doesn't respond, and eventually the feet do go away. And I'll keep in mind, it's about 3 a.m. I assume the front door of the boarding house is locked. But someone or something using Catherine's voice was knocking at his door and asking him to come out. Classic vampire, like, let me in.
Right.
So that was more or less, that is the true story, more or less, of the Bye-Bye Man. Now, again, Eli loved the story, so it became his Devil's Night standard. It was the way he ended every Devil's Night party and welcomed Halloween. Now, Eli is a good storyteller. He really knows how to say. He would have taken the story I told and given you shivers because he's good at it. And I heard him tell this story, and I have heard a lot of strange stories, as you can imagine. Anyone who's into this stuff, and I'm sure you get this too, people will take you aside after one of your little speeches, and they'll say, I never told anyone this, but when I was 14, I saw a demon sitting on my bed. Or some friends and I were out hunting, and this gigantic hairy creature popped up out of the woods. We ran for our lives and almost overturned the pickup truck driving away. I've heard stories like this, a lot of them. And it was Eli's story that got under my skin.
Right.
When I woke up the next morning, I was lying in bed and looking at that bit of light under the door where you might see 2 feet, the shadows of 2 feet. I was lying there just getting the willies, really, just lying there in bed, being creeped out by this story. Well, after I had accumulated several stories for my historical oddity stories from the Fortean Times, I had this one story of the Bye-Bye Man, and I said, should I include it? Should I not include it? I mean, it's not really historical. It's a spooky story, and I love it. Anyway, I finally included it, and it was the smartest thing I've ever done in my life.
So how did it get how did it get picked up and everything like that?
All right, well, that's a long story. I won't go into it, but the title of the original title of my book was The President's Vampire. You will find another book titled The President's Vampire. That title was stolen from me by that author. We won't go into that. Yeah, we won't go into that because it's perfectly legal. Anyway, it was included in the President's Vampire, and I am a slow writer because, like I said, I think writing about the paranormal should be approached with the same respect that writing about history, science, anything else should be approached with. It drives me crazy when people take this slapdash approach to subjects that I find fascinating. And there's so much of that.
I completely agree with that. I think that the people that do the half-ass stuff, or they come in and then they'll not do enough research, or they'll just go over glaring things. They'll be like, "Oh yeah," and then this magical thing happened, and then blah, and you're like, "Hold on, there, you completely lost me."
Well, or they're quoting a book. That's quoting a book, that's quoting a website, that's quoting another website, that's quoting an article from Fate from 1950, and that was based on a newspaper article that turned out to be a hoax.
Right.
It's just that's the way so much paranormal writing is written. But I said, no, I'm going to write it like a proper historian. I'm going to get primary sources. I'm going to get everything's going to be documented. It's all going to be there. So I did all that, and it gave my writing a certain, I won't say cachet, but it I think the readers really appreciated it because they knew that I took it as seriously as they did. And I always went out of my way to find stories that they didn't know. Or if I found an interesting aspect to a story that they did know, that's what I would write about. And that seems to have served me pretty well. I mean, people do seem to like my books, so I'm happy with that.
All right.
And anyway, with the Bye-Bye Man, I began. Again, this was the second plan I've ever made in my life that actually worked out. I said, I am going to do, and keep in mind, this was about 2005. I said, this was when Art Bell was going off the air, he was not doing Coast to Coast anymore. George Noory was picking up, and there was an explosion of paranormal podcasts. There were hundreds of them, hundreds. I mean, there was on Blog Talk Radio, there had to be 2 or 3 dozen.
Oh, at least.
Yeah, and it was usually just a guy sitting in his kitchen with the phone, and great, I was fine with that. So I said to myself, I am going to do every single little show I can find, and I'm going to get good at this. I'm going to get good at being on the radio before I get on the big shows. Because when I get on Coast to Coast, I want to be able to tell this story so that people appreciate it.
Right, you want to knock them dead.
I want to knock them dead. I wanted to have my joke ready. I wanted to have everything ready. And it actually worked out. I did something like 50 or 60 shows. They called me, which was a shock too. And that's how I ended up doing it. Well, when I did that, first of all, I sold 1,000 books that night, which was really nice.
Oh, man.
But as I was doing it, it turns out that someone in Hollywood was listening. And I told the story of the Bye-Bye Man the way I told you that I used to tell it, where I wouldn't tell his name. And I would say, and until the very end, and then I would only say it with a warning that if you can't stop thinking about something, leave the room, turn off your radio, do something like that. By the way, if you're on Coast to Coast, don't ever say on the air, turn off your radio. They don't appreciate that.
They get all mad.
So anyway, somebody out there heard it. I think it was Ted Pryor. Ted Pryor, he made some really cheesy horror movies. I mean, he did one called Killer Workout, which was about a slasher in an aerobics place back in the 80s that is just painful to watch.
Sure.
But he was always in the business, and he made a lot of movies for a guy who really didn't work for the big studios. And he contacted me, which was pretty cool for me, because I actually knew who he was. Also, and this surprised me, turns out he made some brilliant little documentaries on the Zodiac Killer. Ooh. I mean, these things are incredible. I was really shocked. I couldn't believe it was the same guy who made these cheesy horror movies. But anyway, he began to sell this. I told him, I'm thrilled that you contacted me. I know absolutely nothing. Talk to my editor. And that's what got things started. There was something, in the end, I ended up getting a 30 to 40 page Hollywood contract, which has to be seen to be believed. I mean, it's literally 2 or 3 inches thick. I had to read every word of it. I understood nothing. I signed everything. So, and in the end, I never expected anything to happen.
Right, because stories get optioned, scripts get picked up, all the time. It's the green light that counts.
I never, ever expected it to be made. I was thrilled that I was getting option money.
Right.
That was more money than I'd ever seen. It was, writing is not a big money proposition.
Right. It's not all Stephen King out there.
No. In fact, you could probably list the Stephen Kings on 2 hands.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. The rest of us, not so much.
Right.
Anyway,
the rest of us are writing stories for porno mags. I understand.
Yes, again, those bills need paying. So I put the story. Although there was one thing I wanted to mention, and that was that part of what I had to do with the contract was I had to get permission from Catherine and John, and of course Eli. But Eli was happy to get permission.
He was all in.
He's a great guy. I mean, he said if there's any money, they wanted to know what percentage he should get. He told me, he said, if there's any money, you take it. You need it because you're a writer. So like I said, he is a great guy.
Right.
And also he helped me write it because I tried to get as stripped down a version of it as possible because he had been embroidering it and gussying it up and,
Sure.
making the story because he was just telling it as a party story to scare people. Anyway, I did finally track down John and Catherine. It wasn't easy, but I did finally track them down. And Catherine had an interesting little requirement. She was willing to sign the release. She wanted no money, but she wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. She didn't want to hear about it again. She didn't want to see anything about it. She didn't want anything to do with it. So, because it scared her that badly.
I hope she's not watching Hulu this week.
I hope not. Yeah, I think, I don't know what they did to the story. I assume they changed it a lot. But so anyway, again, I never expected it to be made. About a year ago, a friend of mine writes to me and says, your name is in Variety. And I said,
Man.
Why? And that's when things started to happen because that's when they started talking about, oh, we have a production company. No, we sold it to another production company. No, it's owned by this production company. I still don't know who actually made the film. And then they started talking about they were casting it. And I said, well, that sounds impressive, but I still know that entire movies get made and sit on the shelf for 5 years
absolutely,
or never get released at all. So I still wasn't going to allow myself to get excited. Then they said they were seeking out locations. Still exciting. Then 3 weeks later, they were done filming. Then they announced the first release date and the second release. Finally, it is being released on Friday, the 13th, and apparently around the world, because I have found posters in Chinese, Spanish, Russian, Estonian.
Wow. An Estonian translation of your story. That's fantastic.
Yes. In fact, I if you'd like, I can send you the poster. Oh, the thing. I actually thought it was Turkish. I didn't know what language it was, but it was. It's Estonian. So this thing is going to become a worldwide phenomenon, and I wonder how many millions of people are now thinking the Bye-Bye Man, the Bye-Bye Man, the Bye-Bye Man.
Right, there's millions of new beacons.
That's right, millions of new beacons. And apparently, now, I expected them to change the movie. I know when I go see the movie tomorrow night, I do not expect to stand up and scream, "You bastards ruined my movie."
Right.
I don't expect that. I know enough to know that translating a story that has no real beginning, middle, or end, it needs context, it needs characters. I know they had to make changes, and I expect that. I was really happy to see, though, that they kept some version of Gloomsinger. They made him into a dog, which I thought was really cool, a mean-looking dog,
Okay.
because he does help the Bye-Bye Man hunt. So it
Right.
makes sense for him to be a dog. So I was pretty impressed by that. And then when Doug Jones was playing him, and Doug Jones is just amazing. I mean,
Yes,
I
he
watched this preview. He looks like he's walking down a staircase in a bathrobe, and yet he's scary. How can this be? I can't. I'm kind of in awe of Hollywood. It's a weird thing. On one hand, I can't get over what they can do. On the other hand, I find it very weird that they don't have the dedication to. This is not a subject that fascinates them. This is a movie to shoot, a role to play, a
Right.
script to write, then on to the next thing. It might have nothing to do with it. And I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that because this is my life.
Right.
I can't. I don't fly in, do my bit, and leave. This is what I do. So that part of it's been a little strange for me. But again, I am thrilled. I am so looking forward to tomorrow night or Friday, whenever I get to go see it.
Well, we're super excited for you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it.
And I'm sure they changed the location. I'm sure it's not going to be. I know it's not going to take place in Madison.
No, it's. I meant to mention one other thing. I did some research because I wanted to find out if there was any truth to the Bye-Bye Man's story. Well, there was no orphanage in Algiers, and Algiers. The story never mentions that Algiers is part of New Orleans. I didn't know that either. Turns out that it's on the other side of the river. It's the only part of New Orleans that's not attached to the city. And it also is a railroad hub. So I think the Southern Pacific Railroad had a big train yard there. So yeah, there was a lot of train traffic going through Algiers. So that little bit of the story kind of holds up.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And I tried to figure out where the story might have come from, and they've apparently made it, judging by the commercials, because I don't know anything that they did.
Sure.
I was not consulted. I didn't want to be consulted. I mean, if somebody had called me to ask a question, I would have answered it, but I wasn't going to try to muscle in on something that really I know nothing about.
Right. What did you sign the 40-page contract for? So
Exactly.
It's your guys, you take it.
Right. I mean, the only thing, if they start making sequels, the only thing I ask is that if there's ever a restaurant scene, I want to be in the background somewhere on working on my computer, which is kind of like how I wrote it. But the film, they filmed it in Cleveland,
Okay.
which is not a bad stand-in for Wisconsin.
No.
Because it'll have railroads, and it's got the same kind of prairie look.
And funny enough, when they filmed Major League, the movie, the Bob Uecker and stuff like that, was supposed to take place in Cleveland, and they filmed it in Milwaukee instead.
Oh, naturally, because that seems to be the way things work.
Right.
I don't understand it. Like I said, this is a whole world I know absolutely nothing about. This is probably my one brush with glamour, and I'm going to enjoy it.
Hell yeah.
But I'm also on one. It's really strange because on one hand, there is a part of me that is desperate for attention. Like, oh my God, people are finally paying attention to what I do. And there's another part of me that's saying, oh God, I wish it was over. I just want to go back to being left alone, writing my stuff, and I don't want to hear about the Bye-Bye Man anymore. So it's a very weird thing because you get very ambivalent about this stuff, but I am still thrilled about it, and I really hope that I'm sure it's going to be a good movie. It looks terrific, and I hope to sell a lot of books.
Well, we hope you sell a lot of books. And the thing is, if you guys want to pick up a copy of the book that this movie is based on, we're going to have links in the show notes where you can find Robert's Facebook page, The Historian of the Strange, so you get updates from him. We're going to have links to where you can purchase the book, and you can find that all at othersidepodcast.com/127. That's othersidepodcast.com/127, and you'll be able to find links so you can connect with Robert, read his updates, and check out the real story that the Hollywood version is just coming out.
Yeah. And the one thing I mentioned earlier was that Anyway, Eli and I are thinking about putting together a documentary when this is all over, called "The Real Bye Bye Man." Just a short piece, but we'll film on the actual locations, describe what happened, and it'll be much more open-ended. But I think people will be interested in seeing it. And besides, I'm getting awfully tired of reading these comments about saying it's a ripoff of Slender Man.
Right.
It came out years and years before anyone ever heard of Slender Man.
And interestingly enough, though, it was Wisconsin. There was the Slender Man stabbing happened.
Oh, yeah.
About 60 miles from Sun Prairie.
Yes, well, let's face it. Wisconsin is one of those places where things happen.
Don't I know? Well, I got to thank you for joining us today, Robert. Your storytelling is wonderful. Your books are great. I encourage everybody to pick up a copy of this book. And we're going to have you on again sometime just to tell some of the other stories and everything, because I want to hear so much more about the Historian of the Strange.
Oh, great. My pleasure. Anytime.
Wow, great job, Mike.
Fantastic interview, Mike.
Thank you, guys. You know who else thought so? Robert Damon. And he said that he'd come back on the show anytime to talk about other stuff.
Yay!
So the thing is, there's so much. I mean, the President's Vampire story, like he just has a ton of interesting, strange tales. And this week we just wanted to talk about The Bye Bye Man because the movie came out.
Yeah.
But we have a ton of other stuff, and I hope he has a new book out soon or whatever, so I have an excuse to bug him again, and then we can all get in and we talk to Robert Damon and pick his brain about weirdness in the world.
Yeah,
Sounds
and
great.
I mean, even if he doesn't have a book out, he's always looking for strange stories and posting them on Facebook at his page, Historian of the Strange.
And you'll be able to find that on the othersidepodcast.com/127 is where you can find that.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to have the guts to actually watch the movie because just hearing him tell that story really creeped me out. But if you saw the movie or you're curious about how the screenplay compares to the story that Robert shared with us, there's a podcast that the International Screenwriters Association puts together, and it's called Page 2 Screen. This week, they're talking about Bye Bye Man. So that would be a good place to go and check out some discussion about the screenplay. And I'm really curious to hear and possibly see how it compares to the story. And we'll be sure to include a link to that in our show notes as well.
You know, one thing that I really liked about him is that he doesn't try to have some kind of out-of-your-butt explanation for things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he pretty much sticks to the facts.
Yeah, he sticks to the facts and just says like, well, here's some theories I have. But he doesn't say, well, obviously the Bye Bye Man was this demonic entity that showed up and then he really was in Wausau, Wisconsin, like tracking them down. He doesn't get too ridiculous. And I really appreciate that because that makes me believe his writing even more.
Right. And a lot of his writing, too, has strong ties to history. So, that's what's fun about it, too. When you're talking about the paranormal, how much of it can be verified, but it's tantalizing when you feel that there are and you find out that there are real connections to history. And
it also is tantalizing to realize that right in our own backyard, Madison, Wisconsin, there's some Ouija board that's probably still around here. Ooh. That is what the Bye Bye Man used, to find and to zone in, to hone in on these college students and come in for the kill.
Wow.
And I love that. And the fact is that boarding house still on Lake Mendota where the weird knocks happened in the middle of the night. And I'm just thinking about that. Now, Wendy, we've lived in a variety of different kind of places. I mean, I think about that house, think about all the houses we lived in college. And, you would have like separate entrances. There'd always be a ton of doors, people coming in and out. Allison, you even lived somewhere where you had like a weird downstairs neighbor, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He wasn't a downstairs neighbor. He was actually a homeless guy who lived in our basement. And it was an unfinished basement, and he actually had curtains. Well, not curtains, like bedspreads up as a big curtain. Like he would live in the corner, and then he'd have that area like partitioned off with these reams of cloth. And then anytime I came down to do the laundry, he'd come out and talk to me. Perfectly normal, right?
Right.
He was
so
related.
You lived with the Bye Bye Man.
Yeah. He was related to the owner of the home where we were living, but it was very strange. But he was one of those like 60s kind of radical characters. So I was like, yeah, if you're a hippie, you're okay.
You're all right.
Right.
Man.
He was like like a freegan or something.
Yeah.
The thing is, I can just imagine, there's always people coming in and out of those places, and there's always separate entrances. And if you were being stalked by a supernatural murderer, that would be like, those places would be perfect because they just sneak up your staircase, knock on the door in the middle of the night.
You just think it's one of your roommates or something.
Right. And I remember one house that when I was living on the top floor, it had its own staircase to the back, its own back door. And sometimes people would come up to the back door and nobody else would see them. Nobody else knew they were around. And that's the kind of thing. Like if I hear that knock in the middle of the night, 3:00, let's go out for breakfast.
Yeah.
Hey, IHOP's open. Like where would they? Well, I'm thinking about in 1990 in Madison, they would be going to IHOP. That'd be the only place to go at 3:00 in the morning.
Well, it's funny because
Rudy Tooty, fresh and fruity.
Yeah, it reminds me of the land shark.
Right. Breakfast versus all.
Extra side of bacon.
Right. Extra load to the cut of your eyes.
It's really the bye-bye man with a bag of tongues and eyeballs. This is the Hal Gloom singer.
The sack of gore. And, that's the perfect transition because when we were talking about ideas for songs and things like that for this week, there was just one word that I couldn't get out of my head. Gloom singer.
When the whistling note of 1,000 tongues draws near, when a name find you once you only hear, on the tracks and impending, never resting, never ending, the whistling of 1,000 tongues draws near. When the vision of 1,000 eyes grows nigh, seeing you wherever you try to hide. A friendly voice knock at the door, a bloody sack, flesh and gold, the vision of 1,000 eyes grows nigh.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Wendy, who can't we forget?
Oh my gosh, Ned. We saw him at the party last weekend.
We did see Ned at the party last
Thanks for coming
weekend.
to the party,
And
Ned.
thanks for enjoying the party with us, Ned. And also, Ned is at the level of Patreon that he gets a shout out every single episode. So, Ned, thank you. Your support makes this awesome stuff possible.
Absolutely.
And for the rest of our Patreons, we love you too, and your
Yes.
support makes it possible. And so you can also join that community if you're interested and get cool surprises and just help support the kind of stuff that Wendy and I and our guitar player Ben put out every single week. And you can find that at othersidepodcast.com/donate. That's right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye,
Man.
Let's face it, Wisconsin is one of those places where things happen.